I was sitting in my home office when I heard Linda on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice had that careful tone she used when she was trying to sound casual but wasn't. I could hear fragments through the half-open door. No, he doesn't know yet. I'll handle it this week. I didn't think much of it. Linda talked to her son Marcus almost daily. They were close. Too close, some people said, but I'd always tried to be understanding. A mother's love for her child doesn't end just because he's 34 years old. The account number? Hold on, let me find the papers. That's when something shifted in my chest. A small alarm, quiet but persistent. I stood up from my desk and walked closer to the doorway, not making a sound. My socks muffled my steps on the hardwood floor. Yes, the one with about 2 million. Once my name is on it, we can add yours right after. He trusts me completely. He won't even question it. The words landed like stones in still water. Each one sank slowly, leaving ripples that kept spreading. I stepped back into my office and closed the door silently. I sat down in my chair and stared at the wall for a long time. My hands were steady. My breathing was normal. But something fundamental had just broken, and I could feel the pieces settling into a new arrangement inside me. That account she was talking about. It was mine. The money I'd saved over 32 years of work. The investments I'd carefully built. The inheritance from my parents. The sale of my business. Everything I'd accumulated through decades of discipline and planning. Linda had been my wife for 7 years. We'd met at a community fundraiser. She was warm, attentive, easy to talk to. After my first wife passed, I'd spent 5 years alone. Linda made life feel less empty. She asked about my day. She laughed at my jokes. She made the house feel lived in again. I'd been honest with her from the beginning. I had assets, retirement accounts, property. I wasn't wealthy by celebrity standards, but I was comfortable, secure. I'd worked hard for that security, and I'd been clear that I intended to leave everything to my 2 daughters when I was gone. She'd said she understood. She had her own savings, she'd told me, her own retirement plan. She wasn't looking for someone to take care of her financially. She just wanted companionship, partnership, someone to share the second half of life with. I'd believed her. Marcus had been part of the package. He was in his late 20s when Linda and I got married, already living on his own, working in sales. Linda talked about him constantly, how smart he was, how much potential he had, how the world just hadn't recognized his talents yet. I'd met him a dozen times before the wedding. He was polite enough, a little distant. He called me sir and shook my hand firmly and made appropriate small talk. I figured that was normal. I was the new husband. The replacement for his father, who'd left when Marcus was a teenager. There was bound to be some awkwardness. After the wedding, I noticed small things. Marcus came by the house often. More often than my own daughters visited, actually. He'd stay for dinner. He'd ask Linda for money sometimes. Small amounts, 100 here, 200 there. She'd always say yes. I didn't comment. It was her money to spend. But then the amounts got bigger. 500. 1,000. She'd mention it casually, like it was nothing. Marcus needs help with his rent this month. Marcus's car broke down. Marcus has a business opportunity. I'd started to say something once, but she'd looked at me with such hurt in her eyes. He's my son, she'd said quietly. I can't just abandon him when he needs help. So I'd stayed quiet. Over the years, I'd probably spent close to $40,000 on things for Marcus indirectly. Linda didn't work anymore. She'd retired shortly after we got married. So the money that went to Marcus ultimately came from our joint household account, which I funded. I told myself it wasn't worth arguing about. I had plenty. She was my wife. Her son's struggles were, by extension, my concern. But I'd never put Marcus's name on anything. I'd never made him a beneficiary. I'd never given him access to any accounts. My assets were structured carefully. Everything went to my daughters. Linda knew this. We'd discussed it. She'd signed a prenuptial agreement acknowledging it, and now, apparently, she was planning to change that. Without asking me. Without even telling me. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank's website. The account she'd been talking about was a high-yield savings account I'd had for 15 years. It had grown substantially over time through careful contributions and compound interest. Currently, it held just over $2 million. It was in my name only. Linda wasn't on it. She'd never asked to be. I'd assumed she understood that it was my retirement security, my legacy for my daughters, not something to be divided up or redistributed. I looked at the account details. No recent changes, no additional names. She hadn't done it yet. She was still planning. I sat there for a long time, thinking. I've never been an impulsive person. I spent 30 years in engineering and project management. I learned early that reactive decisions are usually bad decisions. The best solutions come from careful analysis, from understanding the full scope of a problem before you try to fix it. So I didn't confront Linda. I didn't ask her about the phone call. I acted like everything was normal. That night at dinner, she asked me about my day. I told her about a book I was reading. She smiled and nodded and asked follow-up questions. She was good at seeming interested. She always had been. Marcus called earlier, she said as she cleared the plates. He might stop by this weekend. That's nice, I said. She looked at me for a moment like she was trying to read something in my expression, but I kept my face neutral. I've never been good at confrontation. I've always preferred to avoid conflict when possible, but I'm very good at planning. The next morning, I told Linda I was going to the hardware store. Instead, I drove to my bank. I'd called ahead and made an appointment with my account manager, a woman named Patricia, who'd been handling my accounts for almost a decade. I need to move some funds, I told her when we sat down in her office. She pulled up my accounts on her computer. Which account are we talking about? The high-yield savings, all of it. She looked at me over her reading glasses. That's a significant amount. May I ask what's prompting this? I want it somewhere more secure, somewhere that requires multiple layers of authorization. Patricia was quiet for a moment. She'd been in banking long enough to read between lines. Is there a concern about unauthorized access? Let's just say I want to make sure no one can make changes to the account without my direct, in-person approval. She nodded slowly. We have several options for that level of security. We can move the funds to a trust account that requires physical presence and biometric verification for any modifications. We can also set up alerts for any attempted access or inquiries. I want all of that, I said. It took 2 hours to complete the paperwork. We moved the entire $2 million into a new trust account structured in a way that made it nearly impossible for anyone to add their name to it without me physically present, providing identification and confirming the change through multiple verification steps. Patricia also set up notifications. If anyone, including Linda, made any inquiries about my accounts, I'd receive an immediate alert. One more thing, I said as we finished. If my wife comes in and asks about my accounts, I want to be notified. Don't tell her anything, but let me know she asked. Patricia's expression remained professional, but I saw the understanding in her eyes. She'd probably seen this situation before. We can't share account information with anyone not authorized on the account. If she inquires, we'll simply inform her that we can't discuss your private accounts, and you'll receive an alert. Perfect. I drove home feeling calmer than I had in 24 hours. The money was secure. Linda couldn't touch it. Marcus couldn't touch it. My daughter's inheritance was protected, but I still didn't know the full extent of what Linda was planning. That weekend, Marcus did come by. He showed up Saturday afternoon in a new truck, a big, expensive-looking thing with chrome details and leather seats. Linda hugged him and oohed over it, asking him about the features, the price, how he'd managed to afford it. I got a great deal, he said, glancing at me briefly, and Mom helped a little. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. They went out to the back patio and I watched them through the kitchen window. Linda was animated, gesturing, smiling. Marcus was nodding, serious. At one point, she pulled out her phone and showed him something on the screen. He studied it, then said something that made her laugh. I wondered what they were looking at. I wondered what they were planning. That night, after Marcus left, Linda was in a good mood. She hummed while she loaded the dishwasher. She suggested we watch a movie. She cuddled up next to me on the couch like everything was perfect. I put my arm around her and felt nothing. Not anger, not betrayal, nothing. It was like something inside me had shut down. A circuit breaker had flipped, and now I was operating on a different system. One that didn't involve trust or emotional vulnerability. I'd been here before in a different way. When my first wife got sick, I'd learned how to function through pain, how to compartmentalize, how to do what needed to be done even when your heart was breaking. This was similar, except there was no grief, just clarity. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention, really paying attention. I noticed that Linda checked the mailbox before I could get to it. She'd flip through the envelopes quickly, pulling out anything that looked financial. She thought she was being subtle, but once you start watching, you see patterns. I noticed that she'd started asking questions about my routine. When was I going to the doctor next? When was my next haircut appointment? When would I be out of the house for a few hours? I gave her vague answers. Probably next week sometime. I haven't scheduled it yet. I'll let you know. I noticed that Marcus started calling more often. Linda would take the calls in the bedroom with the door closed, her voice low and careful. I noticed that she'd become more affectionate, more attentive, like she was laying groundwork, building goodwill she could spend later. I responded appropriately. I smiled. I thanked her. I acted like nothing had changed, but I was watching everything. One afternoon, Linda said she needed to run some errands and would be gone for a few hours. I told her to take her time. After she left, I went into her office, the small room at the front of the house that she'd set up with a desk and filing cabinet. I'm not proud of this. I'd never snooped through her things before, but I needed to know what I was dealing with. Her filing cabinet wasn't locked. Inside, I found folders organized by year. Tax documents, insurance papers, medical records, nothing unusual. Then I found a folder labeled Financial Planning. Inside were printouts, lots of them. There were articles about asset transfer strategies, information about joint ownership laws, details about what happens to accounts when one spouse dies. There were notes in Linda's handwriting, my name, my account numbers, the approximate balances, a timeline. Add name by March, transfer 50% by June. There was a printout of our prenuptial agreement with certain sections highlighted, specifically, the parts that outlined what she'd receive if we divorced versus what she'd receive if I died. If we divorced, she'd get very little. The prenup was clear about that. We'd split only the assets we'd accumulated together during the marriage, and since I'd funded most of our lifestyle, there wasn't much in joint accounts. But if I died, things were different. As my spouse, she'd have certain legal claims, especially if she could argue she'd been financially dependent on me. And if she'd managed to get her name on some of my accounts before I died, those assets could potentially pass to her directly, outside of my will. I stood there in her office holding these papers and understood. She wasn't planning to divorce me. She was planning for me to die, not murder. I'm not suggesting anything that dramatic, but I'm 71 years old. Linda is 63. Statistically, I'll probably die first. That's not sinister. It's just actuarial reality. And Linda was positioning herself and her son to benefit from that reality as much as possible. I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I closed the filing cabinet. I left her office and went back to my own. I sat at my desk and felt that same strange calm I'd felt the day I overheard her phone call. No panic, no rage, just clarity. She was trying to steal from my daughters. She was trying to redirect money I'd spent a lifetime earning away from the children I'd raised and toward a son who'd never worked for it. And she thought I was too trusting, too complacent, too passive to stop her. She was wrong about that last part. I scheduled an appointment with my attorney the next day. His name was Robert, and he'd handled my estate planning for 20 years. He'd drafted my will, my medical directives, my trust documents. He knew exactly how I wanted my assets distributed. I need to review everything, I told him. I need to make sure it's absolutely airtight. Robert pulled up my files. We went through each document carefully. My will left everything to my two daughters in equal shares. Linda was specifically excluded except for a small cash bequest, $25,000, enough to be respectful, but not enough to change her life. My retirement accounts all listed my daughters as primary beneficiaries. Linda wasn't on them. My life insurance policies all went to my daughters. The house was in my name only. The prenup stated that if I died, Linda could live in it for up to 1 year, after which it would be sold and the proceeds would go to my estate. Everything looks secure, Robert said. But I'm guessing something has happened that's making you concerned. I told him about the phone call, the papers in Linda's office, the timeline she was working on. Robert leaned back in his chair. The good news is that she can't add herself to your accounts without your explicit permission. The bad news is that she might try to contest the will if you die, claiming she was entitled to more as your spouse. Can she win that? Probably not, given the prenup. But she can make it expensive and time-consuming. She can drag your daughters through a legal battle that might last years. How do I prevent that? Robert thought for a moment. The strongest protection is to document everything. Keep records of what she has and hasn't contributed to the marriage financially. Keep evidence that she agreed to the prenup voluntarily and understood its terms. And consider adding a no-contest clause to your will. If she challenges it, she loses even the small bequest. We spent 2 hours updating documents and adding provisions. By the time I left Robert's office, I had a will that was reinforced with multiple layers of protection. But I still had a problem. I was living with a woman who was actively planning to redirect my assets, who was having secretive conversations with her son about my money, who was pretending everything was fine while she plotted behind my back. I could divorce her. The prenup would make it clean. But divorce is expensive, even with an agreement. It's public, it's messy. It would hurt my daughters who'd come to accept Linda as part of our family. And part of me, a stubborn, quiet part, wanted her to understand what she'd done wrong without me having to explain it to her. I wanted her to realize that I wasn't the passive, trusting fool she thought I was. So I waited. I kept living my normal life. I had breakfast with Linda. I watched television with her in the evenings. I answered her questions about my day. I asked about hers. But I was paying attention to everything. In early March, Linda said she needed to go to the bank to update some paperwork. She asked, casually, if I needed to go into town for anything. I'm fine, I said. You go ahead. 2 hours later, I got an alert on my phone. Linda had visited my bank. She'd asked to speak with someone about my accounts. She'd been told politely but firmly that she couldn't access information about accounts she wasn't authorized on. She'd left after 15 minutes. When she came home, I was in the living room reading. She set her purse down and smiled at me. How was your errand? I asked. Oh, fine. Just some paperwork. Her voice was light, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. Everything go okay? Yes, everything's fine. She was lying to my face and she didn't even look uncomfortable doing it. That night, I heard her on the phone with Marcus again. This time I stood right outside the bedroom door and listened. He must have changed something. They wouldn't even talk to me. Marcus's voice was muffled through the door, but his tone was sharp. I don't know when, Linda said, but we need to think of something else. Maybe I can talk to him directly. Suggest we add each other to accounts for convenience, in case something happens. More muffled response. He won't suspect anything. He never does. He's too... She trailed off, but I knew what she'd been about to say. Too trusting. Too naive. Too easy to manipulate. I went back to my office quietly. I sat down and stared at the dark window and felt something settle deep in my chest. Not anger. Something colder than anger. Resolve. Over the next month, Linda tried 3 more times to bring up the idea of adding her name to my accounts, just in case something happens. She was subtle about it. She'd mention a news story about someone who died suddenly and their spouse couldn't access the accounts. She'd talk about her friend whose husband had a stroke and left everything in chaos. Each time I'd nod and say something non-committal. That's a good point. I should think about that. You might be right, let me consider it. But I never did anything, and Linda grew more frustrated, though she tried to hide it. Marcus started coming around more often. He was friendlier than he'd ever been. He asked me about my work history, my investments, my plans for retirement. He called me by my first name instead of sir. I answered his questions politely. I didn't give him anything useful, but I didn't shut him down either. I wanted him to think he was making progress. In April, Linda suggested we update our wills together. Just to make sure everything is current, she said. We're not getting any younger. I agreed. We made an appointment with a local attorney, not Robert, someone Linda had found. A young guy with a strip mall office and a website that promised affordable estate planning. We sat in his office and Linda explained what she wanted. She wanted to make sure that we're both taken care of if something happened to either of us. She wanted to simplify things by maybe having more assets in both names. She wanted to make sure her son would be okay if she wasn't around. The young attorney nodded along, taking notes. Then he asked me what I wanted. I have an existing estate plan, I said. It's comprehensive and up to date. I had it reviewed recently by my attorney. I'm satisfied with it. Linda's smile faltered for just a second. But don't you want to make sure Linda is provided for? The attorney asked. She's provided for, I said calmly. Our prenuptial agreement outlines exactly what she'll receive. My current will honors that agreement. Everything is already arranged. Linda was staring at me now, her expression confused. I thought we were going to update things together. You're welcome to update your will however you'd like, I said. But I'm comfortable with mine as it is. The appointment ended shortly after that. Linda was quiet on the drive home. I could feel the questions building inside her, but she didn't ask them. That night she didn't call Marcus. She sat in the living room with a glass of wine, staring at the television without really watching. I read my book and said nothing. The next few weeks were tense. Linda was still polite, still functionally pleasant, but the warmth was gone. She stopped asking about my day. She stopped suggesting we watch movies together. She spent more time in her office with the door closed. I didn't mind. The quiet was easier than the pretense had been. In May, something shifted. Linda came into my office one afternoon. Her face was composed, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. We need to talk, she said. Okay. She sat down across from my desk. I feel like you don't trust me. I looked at her calmly. What makes you say that? You won't add me to any of your accounts. You won't update your will. You act like I'm going to steal from you. I've never said that. You don't have to say it. I can feel it. I set down my book. Linda, when we got married, we both agreed on how finances would be handled. We signed a prenup that outlined everything clearly. I've honored that agreement completely. Nothing has changed. But things should change, she said, her voice rising slightly. We're married. We're supposed to be partners. Partners share things. We do share things. We share a home. We share daily expenses. We share our lives. But my assets were accumulated before we met, and they're designated for my daughters. That was always the agreement. That's not fair to me. It's exactly what we agreed to. She stood up abruptly. You're punishing me for something. I don't know what, but you're freezing me out. I'm not punishing you. I'm just maintaining the boundaries we established from the beginning. She left the room without another word. That night I heard her on the phone with Marcus. Her voice was sharp, angry. I couldn't make out all the words, but I heard stubborn and selfish and we'll have to try something else. I went to bed early. I slept fine. The breaking point came in June. I was at a regular checkup with my doctor, a routine appointment I'd scheduled months in advance. While I was sitting in the waiting room, my phone buzzed. Another alert from the bank. Linda had tried to access my accounts again. This time she'd brought documentation, a copy of our marriage certificate, and a notarized letter claiming she had legal authority to manage my accounts due to my declining health. The bank had refused. They'd told her that I'd need to be physically present to authorize any changes, and that I'd need to provide medical documentation if I was claiming diminished capacity. She'd argued with them. She'd demanded to speak to a manager. She'd threatened to call a lawyer. They'd politely asked her to leave. I sat in that waiting room, reading the detailed alert on my phone, and felt the last remaining thread of whatever I'd felt for Linda finally break. She'd tried to lie to my bank. She'd tried to claim I was mentally unfit so she could take control of my money, not to protect me, not to help me, to redirect assets to herself and her son. When I got home, Linda was in the kitchen making lunch. She looked up when I walked in, her face carefully neutral. "How was your appointment?" she asked. "Fine. Everything's good." "That's wonderful." She smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. I went to my office and closed the door. I called Robert. "I need to start divorce proceedings," I said. There was a brief pause. "Are you sure?" "Completely sure." "What happened?" I told him about the bank incident, about the forged letter, about her claim that I was mentally declining. Robert's voice hardened. "That's financial fraud. If she signed a notarized letter making false claims about your mental state, that's a crime." "I don't want to press charges," I said. "I just want her out of my life." "Understood. I'll start the paperwork. Given the prenup, this should be straightforward. Do you want her out of the house immediately?" "No. I want to do this correctly. By the book. No drama." We spent an hour going over details. Robert would file the papers. Linda would be served. We'd offer her exactly what the prenup specified. Nothing from the accounts she'd tried to access, but a small settlement from marital assets and 60 days to move out of the house. "She's going to fight this," Robert warned. "Let her fight. Everything is documented. The prenup is clear. She has no legal ground to stand on." After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time. I felt lighter than I had in months. The pretense was over. The careful watching and waiting was done. Now it was just a matter of letting the legal process run its course. Linda was served with divorce papers on a Thursday morning. I'd arranged to be out of the house when it happened. I had no interest in witnessing her reaction. When I came home that afternoon, she was sitting in the living room with the papers spread out on the coffee table. Her face was pale, her eyes red. She looked up when I walked in. "You're divorcing me?" "Yes." "Why?" I almost laughed. The audacity of the question was breathtaking. "You know why," I said calmly. "I don't. I've been a good wife to you. I've taken care of this home. I've been here for you. You tried to steal from me. You tried to add your name to my accounts without my knowledge. You went to my bank and lied about my mental capacity. You coordinated with your son to redirect assets I'd planned to leave to my daughters." Her face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, denial, calculation. Finally, anger. "I'm your wife. I deserve to be taken care of." "You will be taken care of, exactly as the prenup specifies. You'll receive what we agreed you'd receive." "That's not enough." "It's what we agreed to." She stood up, her hands shaking. "You can't do this. I'll fight it. I'll take you to court. You'll lose," I said quietly. "The prenup is solid. You signed it voluntarily. You understood the terms. And now there's documented evidence that you attempted fraud. If you fight this, all of that will come out in court. You'll end up with nothing. And you might face criminal charges." Her face crumbled. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered her voice on the phone with Marcus. He trusts me completely. He won't even question it. "I'm going to stay at a hotel for the next few days," I said. "That will give you time to process this. My attorney will contact you about next steps. I suggest you get your own lawyer." I went upstairs, packed a bag, and left. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. Linda hired an attorney who tried to challenge the prenup, claiming it was signed under duress. When that didn't work, they argued that she deserved more because she'd given up her career to be my wife. The judge reviewed the case thoroughly. He noted that Linda had retired from her job before we met. He noted that the prenup had been negotiated by attorneys representing both of us. He noted that Linda had received regular financial support throughout the marriage and had contributed nothing to the account she was now trying to claim. He upheld the prenup completely. Linda received $50,000, the sum specified in the agreement for a marriage lasting 5 to 10 years. She received nothing from my retirement accounts, nothing from my investment accounts, nothing from the house, which remained solely in my name. Marcus tried to contact me twice during the proceedings. I didn't respond. When the divorce was final, Linda moved out. She took her personal belongings and furniture we'd bought together. She left without saying goodbye. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she moved in with Marcus for a while. Then she found an apartment. She got a part-time job. She told people I'd been cruel to her, that I'd abandoned her, that I'd broken my promises. I didn't correct the record. The people who mattered knew the truth. My daughters called me after the divorce was finalized. "Are you okay, Dad?" my younger daughter asked. "I'm fine. We were worried. We didn't want to say anything while you were married, but we never really trusted her. I wish you'd told me. Would you have listened?" Probably not. I'd been lonely. Linda had filled that loneliness with warmth and attention and the illusion of partnership. I'd wanted to believe it was real, but it hadn't been real. It had been a performance. A long-term strategy that I'd accidentally disrupted by being more careful with my assets than she'd anticipated. "I'm sorry you had to go through this," my daughter said. "Don't be. I learned something important." "What's that?" "That being alone is better than being with someone who sees you as an asset to be liquidated." She laughed, but it was a sad sound. "Yeah, I guess that's true." Now, a year later, I live alone in my house. I have my routines. I read. I work on projects. I see my daughters regularly. I have friends I meet for coffee and lunch. I don't feel lonely anymore. Loneliness comes from being disconnected. I'm not disconnected. I'm just selective about who I connect with. I think about Linda sometimes. I wonder if she understands what she did wrong. I wonder if she ever feels guilty about trying to manipulate me. I wonder if Marcus thinks about the inheritance he almost had access to. Probably not. People like Linda and Marcus don't tend towards self-reflection. They move on to the next opportunity, the next person who might be easier to convince, the next situation they can exploit, but that's not my problem anymore. My money is secure, my assets are protected, my daughters will inherit what I've built, just as I always planned, and I sleep well at night. Not because I got revenge, I didn't. I just protected what was mine and removed someone from my life who saw me as a means to an end rather than a person deserving of honesty and respect. That's not revenge. That's just self-preservation. And sometimes self-preservation is the quietest, most effective form of justice there is. Character count. 28,473. I need to expand this significantly to meet the 35,000, 40,000 requirement. Let me continue with deeper development of Acts 2, 3, and 5. I'd spent 5 years alone after Claire died, and I was comfortable with that solitude. I wasn't looking for anyone. Linda was volunteering at the registration desk. She had this way of making everyone feel welcomed. She remembered names after hearing them once. She asked thoughtful questions. When I checked in, she looked at my name tag and said, "Engineering background?" I must have looked surprised because she smiled and explained that her late father had been an engineer, and she recognized the methodical way I'd filled out the form, every line perfectly aligned. It was such a small observation, but it made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. We talked for maybe 10 minutes while she processed other attendees. She told me about her work in medical administration, about her son who was finding his way, about how she'd recently started volunteering because retirement had left her with too much empty time. I understood that feeling completely. She didn't ask for my number, didn't suggest we meet, just wished me a pleasant evening and turned to help the next person in line. That restraint impressed me. I'd learned to be wary of women who seemed too interested too quickly, but I found myself looking for her throughout the evening. I saw her helping set up the dessert table, laughing with other volunteers, moving through the crowd with easy confidence. At the end of the night, I stopped by the registration desk. She was packing up paperwork. "Thank you for making tonight welcoming," I said. She looked up and smiled. You're welcome. Did you win anything in the auction? A weekend at a bed and breakfast I'll probably never use. You should go. Life's too short to leave experiences on the shelf. Something about the way she said it, not pushy, not flirtatious, just genuine, made me ask if she'd like to have coffee sometime. Her face lit up. I'd love that. Our first date was at a small cafe downtown. We talked for 3 hours. She asked about my career, my daughters, my late wife. She listened, really listened, in a way that felt rare. She didn't try to fill silences with chatter. She didn't offer empty platitudes about Claire's death. She just acknowledged that loss was part of life and that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. I told her about the business I'd built from nothing, about the decades of careful saving, about how I'd always prioritized security for my family over luxury for myself. She nodded and said her father had been the same way. Practical, disciplined, always thinking about the future. She told me about her marriage. Her husband had left when Marcus was 15, just walked out one day and never came back. She'd raised Marcus alone, working full-time and going without so he could have what he needed. I respected that sacrifice. I understood it. He's had a harder time than most, she said about Marcus. The abandonment affected him. He struggled to find stable work, but he's got a good heart. He just needs the right opportunity. I heard the love in her voice, the protective instinct. It reminded me of how I felt about my own daughters. We dated for 18 months before I proposed. I wasn't impulsive about it. I watched how she interacted with my daughters during family dinners. I observed how she managed conflict, calmly, rationally. I paid attention to what she said about money. She seemed to share my values about living within one's means. I also introduced her to my attorney, Robert, who explained the prenuptial agreement carefully. Linda sat through the meeting attentively. She asked clarifying questions. She acknowledged that I had children from a previous marriage and that protecting their inheritance was reasonable. "I'm not marrying you for money," she said after the meeting, her hand in mine. "I'm marrying you because you make me feel less alone in the world." I believed her. The wedding was small. My daughters attended, though I sensed some reservation from them. Marcus was there, polite and distant. Linda's friends from her volunteer work filled out the rest of the guests. During our vows, Linda looked into my eyes and promised to be my partner, my companion, my support, in all things, for whatever time we have together. I meant my vows too. I intended to honor them completely. The first year of marriage was good. Better than good. Linda made the house feel alive again. She was up before me each morning, making coffee, reading the news. She asked about my projects and actually remembered the details. When I worked in the garage on woodworking, she'd bring me water and admire whatever I was building. She was affectionate, but not clingy. She gave me space when I needed it. She had her own interests, her book club, her volunteering, her yoga classes. Marcus came around occasionally, usually on Sunday afternoons. Linda would make dinner, and the three of us would sit around the table making conversation. Marcus asked me about my work history sometimes, about retirement, about how I'd managed to save so successfully. I answered his questions, though I kept details vague. Not because I distrusted him, but because talking about money specifics with anyone other than my daughters or attorney felt inappropriate. Linda never pushed for more information. She seemed content with our arrangement. She had access to our joint household account, which I funded with enough for groceries, utilities, and discretionary spending. She could buy what she needed without asking permission. That felt fair, but looking back now I can see the small signs I ignored. Like how Linda would sometimes ask, casually, what I'd been doing at the bank when I mentioned I'd stopped there, or how she'd glance at mail before I could get to it, as if she was cataloging what accounts I had, or how she'd bring up stories about other couples who'd combined their finances to make things simpler. I'd brush these off as idle conversation, as her being interested in my life as natural curiosity. But they weren't idle. They were reconnaissance. The requests for money for Marcus started so small, I barely noticed them. $50 for gas, $100 for groceries, $200 because his paycheck was delayed. Linda would mention these needs casually, and I'd transfer money to her account without much thought. But the requests grew. $500 because Marcus's landlord had raised the rent unexpectedly. $1,000 because his car needed major repairs. $1,500 because he had a chance to invest in a friend's business. Each time, Linda would frame it as temporary. He'll pay it back. It's just until he gets on his feet. This opportunity could change everything for him. He never paid it back. The opportunities never panned out. And within a few months, there'd be another crisis, another need, another request. I started keeping track after the first year. By year 3, I'd given Linda approximately $28,000 for Marcus. By year 5, it was close to $40,000. I told myself it didn't matter. I had enough. Linda was happy. And if helping Marcus made her happy, wasn't that worth something? But I also noticed that Marcus never seemed to improve his situation. He always had the same entry-level sales job. He still lived in the same modest apartment. The truck he drove was always breaking down, requiring more repairs. Where was the money going? I didn't ask. Asking felt accusatory, and Linda would have been hurt if I'd suggested her son was irresponsible with money. So I stayed quiet and kept funding the requests. By year 6, something had shifted in Linda. The warmth had become more strategic. She was still affectionate, but it felt timed, like she was maintaining a baseline of connection rather than expressing genuine feeling. She started mentioning her friends whose husbands had taken care of them by adding them to accounts, whose husbands had made sure they'd be secure if something happened, whose husbands trusted them completely with financial decisions. Each story felt like a gentle pressure, a suggestion that I should be doing the same. I'd respond with vague agreement. That's nice for them, and change the subject. Linda would let it drop, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. Marcus started coming around more frequently, every weekend instead of every other week. He'd stay for hours, talking with Linda in low voices on the patio while I worked in the garage or read in my office. Sometimes I'd walk past them and catch fragments of conversation. Needs to understand you're his wife. Been more than fair. Not asking for everything, just security. They'd stop talking when they noticed me. Smile. Ask if I needed anything. I'd say no and keep walking, but the fragments stayed with me. One Saturday afternoon in the 7th year, I was in the garage organizing tools when Marcus came in. He leaned against the workbench, hands in his pockets, casual but deliberate. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. Do you have a plan? You know, for what happens to Mom if something happens to you?" The question landed like a stone, direct, presumptuous. "Linda is provided for," I said carefully. "We have a prenuptial agreement that outlines everything clearly." "Right, but that's pretty limited, isn't it? She'd only get a small amount, after everything she's done for you." I set down the screwdriver I'd been holding and looked at him directly. "Your mother and I agreed on the terms of our marriage before we got married. She was happy with those terms." "Was she? Or did she just agree because she loved you and didn't want to rock the boat?" "You'd have to ask her." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "I worry about her. She gave up a lot to be with you. Her independence, her security. And if you died tomorrow, she'd be back to struggling." "She wouldn't be struggling. She'd have a substantial amount." $50,000? Marcus interrupted. "That's substantial. That wouldn't last her 2 years." I felt my jaw tighten. "How do you know the terms of the prenup?" He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Mom mentioned it." Of course she had. She'd told him everything. They'd been planning together all along. "The prenup is between your mother and me," I said evenly. "It's not something I'm going to discuss with you." "I'm not trying to start a fight," Marcus said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I just think you should consider updating things now that you've been married for a while. It would be the right thing to do." "I appreciate your concern for your mother," I said, my voice flat. "But our financial arrangements aren't your business." He stared at me for a long moment. Something cold flickered in his eyes, calculation masked as concern. Then he smiled, clapped me on the shoulder like we'd just had a friendly chat, and walked out of the garage. I stood there holding my tools, understanding finally that I wasn't dealing with a struggling son who needed occasional help. I was dealing with someone who saw me as an obstacle between his mother and money he felt entitled to. That night, Linda asked how my day had been. I said it was fine. She asked if Marcus had stopped by the garage. I said he had. She waited for me to elaborate. I didn't. She went to bed early, and I sat in my office thinking about everything I'd overlooked. All the small compromises, all the requests I'd honored without question, all the times I'd prioritized peace over clarity. I'd been enabling this, not maliciously, but through passivity, through my desire to avoid conflict, through my assumption that generosity would be met with gratitude rather than exploitation. That was the night I started paying real attention, the night I stopped being passive and started being strategic. I didn't change my behavior outwardly. I was still polite, still responsive, still functionally pleasant. But I was watching everything now, and I was planning. When I found Linda's financial planning folder, the one with printouts about asset transfer and highlighted sections of our prenup, I photographed every page with my phone before putting it back. Evidence, just in case. When I overheard her phone calls with Marcus, I started keeping notes. Dates, times, what I could hear, nothing dramatic, just records. When she tried to access my accounts at the bank, I made sure everything was documented. Every attempt, every lie she told, every claim she made. I wasn't building a case for revenge. I was building protection, a clear record that would make any legal challenge she attempted completely untenable. And I was doing it quietly, without confrontation, without tipping her off. Because I'd learned something important over my 71 years. The most effective defense isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's methodical, documented, and inevitable. Linda thought she was being clever. She thought her patience would pay off. She thought I was too passive, too trusting, too old to notice what was happening. She was wrong. And by the time she realized how wrong she was, there was nothing left to take.